Today we're going through all of the things I do / use in order to make my game look the way it does. I'm sorry it took so long to get this out. My life has been a bit hectic right now, so a lot of things have been on the back burner, but hopefully this video covers everything that a lot of you have been asking about. The first thing that I always have in my game now is a Winged Llama's Emptied Base Game Worlds mod. You can probably obviously tell that this part of Willow Creek does not look how it usually does, and that is because of that mod. And so that basically makes it so that you don't have the original ugly EA base game buildings around the world. As you can see, this whole area here is blank, and over here is also blank. There's no neighborhood houses on these sides either. And it gets rid of the debug houses, plants, trees, and pretty much everything in the world for like the base game worlds. It doesn't do the other EPs and stuff like that. But the reason you're seeing the mats, if we go over here, these are called mats, these kind of like set piece things that are over here. It's like PNGs basically for backdrop decoration. Is because I went in and edited the file myself so I could keep some things that I wanted to, because it got rid of a little bit more than I wanted to get rid of. So it usually, you wouldn't even have any of these backdrops or anything. It would be completely empty. The trees also wouldn't be here, but I edited the file myself so that I could keep the trees from debug, and also these like little backdrop things as well. So yeah. I'm a control freak basically, and I go as far as to edit files in mods in the game and stuff like that. But anyways, this mod is really handy if you are someone who wants to build a save file or just really hates where the plants and things are placed in the world. Especially if you use like the tool mod by Twisted Mexi and you are able to move things around the world that you usually aren't allowed to do. It just allows you a lot more freedom to edit your worlds how you want them to look. So the next thing that I use is Lady Moriel's cloud replacement mod. I just really like how fluffy and real the clouds look in the game with this in comparison to like the usual kind of blobby EA Maxis kind of clouds. And they obviously like animate, as you can see here, they animate and they move around. And yeah, I just really like the way they look. I think it looks nice with like screenshots and just in gameplay in general. So that is the cloud replacement that I use. The next mod that I use, I actually just turned it into, I went into like build by mode and just turned it into evening. Because it really shows off this next one, which is the iconic Sunblind lighting mod by Softer Haze. Pretty much everyone knows about this, I feel like, at this point. But essentially it overrides the game's lighting to be more realistic and not as blindingly bright or blue as it usually looks. And the morning sunrises and sunsets are so beautiful with this mod in. I actually can't play without it anymore. It's really something that I have to have in my game. It was like that too with like the Sims 3 and lighting mods. It's just something that changes it so much that it's just something you can't really go without. But yeah, the sunsets are really, really pretty with this mod in, and the mornings are also more realistic looking. This is like the morning light with this mod in, and it just like, you know, it just looks sleepy and nice and more realistic than the original lighting is. So if you want something that's on the more realistic side, it might be a little bit dark for some people's games. People have different tastes obviously, but they do also have different lighting mods if you're interested in changing the lighting and the look of your game. But this is the one that I use. The next thing that I use is Lumia's No Glow and No Blue mod, and it basically changes the lighting to be less blue tinted indoors and outdoors, and have less bright indoors, and gives your Sims better lighting indoors. That was a bit of a mouthful, but it's essential if you want prettier looking lighting indoors and outdoors, and it just makes things less blue and it makes things glow a lot less. Like sometimes you'll find the original lighting in the game when you're inside has like, it's like really bright on your Sims, and also outside as well. Like during the afternoon daytime, sometimes the sidewalks just like look really bright because they're a lighter gray color. So this just makes it to be a bit more balanced, and it doesn't have that original EA blue tone where everything's very, very blue tinted. And so this in hand with the Sunblind mod, I find makes a really, really big difference in the game. And also the Sims lighting inside, the way that the Sims are lit, is just a lot better as well. So the next thing that I use in my game is obviously tree overrides. I actually retextured a lot of the debug trees from CC trees that I love the textures of, and so I could get like exactly the look that I want because I'm a control freak and a weirdo. But I have to still fix everything up with the files so I can actually upload them for download. So they're not quite ready yet. I have to do some stuff with like file names and boring kind of things like that. But I'm hoping to get them out by the end of the summer. So in the meantime, I used to use KHippie's K707 mod, which replaces the trees and plants in all the worlds, and I currently use a mixture of Lady Moriel's plant replacements with some of KHippie's plants because I went and changed and unmerged files and searched up file names to take out ones that I didn't like as much with like the texture of them, and I replaced them with the creator's ones that I did like the texture of. So I wouldn't really recommend doing that if you're not someone who is familiar with using the Sims 4 Studio and looking up file names because they will conflict with each other if you get it wrong. So just to be on the safe side, I would recommend just using one or the other, but you'll see like they'll have screenshots of like the different plants, and they'll have like different textures on them. As you can see, this like looks different. This kind of low-lying grass also looks different from usual. So yeah, they have a lot of overrides, both of the creators, and it's really up to you for what kind of style that you like more, but I definitely would recommend them for your plant and tree replacement needs. Another thing that I use is the KHippie 606 mod, which replaces the flooring, walls, roofs, and trims with more realistic textures. I actually unmerged this one as well and just used the roofing textures and I think the wood floor textures as well. So yeah, some of like the base game wood floors are changed. Like this is actually from the game. It's this like old world wide planks, but it's retextured so it looks a little bit more realistic, and I just prefer the texture of these to the EA ones. Yeah, and so it just like basically retextures it. I also love it for the roofing because I think the roofing just looks a lot better when it has more, you know, variation in the textures and stuff like that. It just looks more realistic in that way. And yeah, so I use this pretty much all the time. It's just like a staple that I have in my game. So if it's something that bothers you, like the kind of floors that comes with EA's builds and stuff like that, and the roofing and things, then I would recommend getting this one as well. I just switched over real quick to the Pancakes household so I can kind of show you the next thing that I use, which is another KHippie mod, because all of their mods are so well done and are staples for me. But this one is a newer one that they have called the 808 Vista mod. And this is a mod that overrides that matte backdrop that I showed you guys earlier. It's like these PNGs. They're just like for world decoration basically. But this overrides them to make them a bit more realistic looking with the textures and stuff. Like you can see the mountains and stuff look different from usual, and especially the trees and the like backdrop shrubs and stuff like that. And I am slightly on the fence with these sometimes just because I feel like it can look a bit distracting. I think that certain ones look a bit distracting, like these kind of matte backdrops right here. But I do think I prefer them to the usual EA Maxis ones just because they sometimes looked a bit weird with having realistic textures everywhere else except for the backdrops. Especially if you have realistic looking trees and then, you know, through the tree lines you can see like plasticky kind of looking backdrops. So yeah, I do think that having the realistic trees and plants and terrains in your world, and then having the usual cartoony Maxis backdrops look out of place. So I'll probably keep it, but who knows? But as of right now, this is something that I also have in my game, just to, you know, add to the ambiance and the vibe of the surroundings. Another replacement mod that I use is, of course, K-Hippie's terrain replacement mod. This is also a staple for me. I get a lot of questions about this. I feel like a lot of people probably know by now that this exists. But yeah, basically it replaces the like grass textures and the dirt textures, as well as the roads and the sidewalks. So pretty much any terrain that you see in the worlds, they have overridden it, so they have a different kind of texture to them. And yeah, I just feel like this is also essential for me just because I like the way it looks a lot more than the kind of plasticky looking one that we usually have in the game. So this is also one that I always have in my game. And they also have like terrain paints also available. So if you want to also have terrain paints that look a little bit more realistic, they also have that as well. And the last replacement that I use is realistic car replacements by Scody Yodi. As you can see, the cars driving past here, they look a lot different from the usual EA Maxis cars. So basically they make the cars that drive around look more realistic, and they change the debug cars in build by menu as well. So you can place them down if you would also like to have, like, you know, cars on your property for storytelling purposes. And, you know, if you want to put like a garage or something down, then you can also have a car. And alternatively, they also have Deco Cars from different decades. I think from the 1950s up to modern times, which is actually really handy if you're someone who plays like, I think it's like the Decades Challenge or something like that. You're playing from different eras and time. I think that would be really cool to have those nostalgic vibes and have different vehicles that suit that decade. I will say I was having trouble when I first downloaded these. I think it's because I had taken out a different car override that I used to use, and I just plunked this file in and it wasn't showing up properly. So I had to delete the local thumb cache file and do a repair on my game. And then they didn't show up glitched out. So if you're having a problem when downloading these cars and they kind of show up and they're glitched out, hopefully that fixes it for you. Also, if you notice that these are Maxis looking cars, they were not able to override, I think, two of the cars. I think it was the black muscle car and that yellow kind of buggy car. They were not able to override those for some reason. So those two aren't overridden, but all of the rest of the cars are. And I think that, I mean, it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. And I'd much prefer having these kind of cars driving around. I also just kind of placed these here really quick so you guys could see. These are some of the Deco Cars that I have in my game. These are from like the 70s, and then there's some from the 80s and more modern cars. And so these are what the Deco Cars look like in the game. I just kind of plunked them on the roof real quick so you guys could see. But yeah, like I really love the way the models look. It looks pretty good, and I like to use them for, you know, populating lots with like some cars, or if I'm doing like a community build and I want to have a parking lot somewhere. Just really handy. Also, if you have the tool mod and you want to put them on the side of the streets to kind of make it look more realistic, like people have been parking on the sides, then they're also really handy for that as well. So those are all of the replacements I use in my game. And also today I am leaving a download for my Reshade. This is the Reshade that I usually use in my videos, and I get a lot of questions about it. The only reason I haven't uploaded it is because I used to upload Reshade presets in the past, but I got really overwhelmed by the amount of questions I kept getting to troubleshoot people's issues they were having with Reshade, and I couldn't do it anymore, so I stopped uploading them. But I am uploading this Reshade preset with the disclaimer that I am not going to be available to troubleshoot issues that you have, or if it looks different in your game, because there are literally hundreds of reasons you might be seeing it differently based on your computer settings, your monitor, reflective light, whether you have a specific graphics card settings, and the list goes on. So while I am uploading this preset today, I'm not available to answer any questions or problems you might have with it. There's a wealth of information you can Google your questions or concerns, and Picture Amoeba on Tumblr. I will link them below. They have very valuable information regarding MXAO and Reshade settings on their Tumblr, and I believe they actually made a like literal spreadsheet for people to look at if they have any issues. So that is a very valuable resource if you are having issues with Reshade, and I will link them down below. But yeah, if you have been looking for this Reshade preset for a while, it is going to be available for download. Another question that I get quite a bit is how I do my reshades and how I make my different reshade presets. And to be honest, I just kind of like flick things on and off, and if it looks good, then it looks good, and then I use it. I don't really have like a system, I guess. I also have an absolutely obscene amount of presets, as you can see here. Some that I've downloaded, and then others that I just like made, that I like edit over time. So yeah, there's a lot, and obviously you can see I just name them whatever because there's so many that I have a hard time, you know, making all of them different unique names. But yeah, as you can see, they're all quite a bit different. Some are more saturated and sharp. Some are a little bit more light. Some are kind of like comic book looking style, with like the outlines on everything. So it honestly kind of varies. It depends on what mood I'm in. Like if I'm playing like a certain household, if my computer's being, you know, weird that day and it can't handle a lot of extra, you know, MXAO or something like that. But yeah, like I have like different branches of some people's reshades that they've made. Some are just ones that I've made off the cuff. And yeah, it's just like, you know, I don't really know how to explain the process of it really, because I genuinely do just like turn things on and like hope for the best. And then if something looks kind of weird, then I won't use it. I'll just like turn it off and do something else. But yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, I guess, the process of it. But I guess since we're here, we could do a preset together. Let me just like, I don't know, I'll name this video preset. I'll turn everything off so we can see what it looks like without anything on. So this is obviously just the game vanilla, no reshade because I turned all the effects off. But as you can see, like there's stuff up here that didn't compile. It is what it is. Like sometimes that happens and I'm too lazy to go and figure it out. So anyways, what I usually do is I type in MXAO first, and these are all the different MXAOs I have. Some of these don't come with the reshade when you download it for the first time. There's some that I've downloaded from other creators. So Sforazinda has made some, so I have theirs here. I think Picture Amoeba also has some, so I have their different versions of MXAO in here as well. So obviously, like, you can get them from a bunch of different sources, like different ones. So I do have quite a bit. I find that there's some that will make your computer chug more than others. So I can't use more than 2 at a time, and I can only use Quints. So this is like by Quint. I can only use Quint's MXAOs together because for some reason, if I mix it with something else, it makes my computer chug. Also, sample quality, which is down here. So if you turn on MXAO, it'll have like the settings for that specific effect, and you can toggle the sample quality. If you turn this up pretty much past high, to be honest, like if I put anything above high, with reshade specifically, I find it makes it very slow. You'll actually have, you can kind of not see it up here, but maybe you can, but up here it actually will tell you the amount of frames that you're losing as you turn on different settings and different effects. So that's really handy with reshade. It'll actually tell you if you are losing frames per second based on what you've just chosen. So that's really handy to use, you know, if it's gonna like chug, if it's gonna be a gameplay preset, maybe you don't want it to be something that's below a certain amount of frames. So that is something handy to keep in mind. But yeah, usually I will select one of the MXAOs first. I also made I just like basically copied an MXAO. I made a second one. I named it number 2. But they also have a number 2 that I didn't realize they had in the game. So it was something I discovered later. But there is a second one that I put in here, and I just use this for a little bit more definition. I also tend to like to make my MXAO not as like tight around the edges. So by that I mean, like, I like to kind of blow out the sample radius. So this is like the sample radius here, and I like to make it a little bit you know, as you can see when I put it up and down, I like the shadows to be more like this when I'm doing a build preset. This does not work for like gameplay presets because I find it makes the Sims, like, let me just turn on, see how like the shadow here on his leg is very like defined. So because these Sims are very low poly in this game, they're actual mesh, it doesn't really blend well with them. So I don't tend to use this very like kind of blown out MXAO with like the shadows like that for gameplay presets. I only use it for build presets because it just doesn't really mesh well with how low poly the Sims meshes are. Because as you can see, like, it makes like this weird, oops, I accidentally grabbed that. These weird like lines and stuff on their legs because obviously the polys, the different like planes are there of the mesh, and so it just looks kind of strange. But if it's just for building, then I do tend to make it a little bit higher like that. I don't know, I prefer the way it looks. There's different blending modes. Some will be darker than others, so you can kind of play with that setting down here. And yeah, you'll have like different things like that. But I usually have MXAO at the top. Another thing that I use pretty often is Filmic Pass. I think this comes with just when you download Reshade, I'm pretty sure. But I usually have Filmic Pass on. It just like makes everything a bit more saturated and brighter. There's a lot of things that you can like edit with this one, like how much contrast there is or how saturated things are. You can fade in how blue or kind of pinky toned it is, and I use that to offset how yellow sometimes the things in the game are. And then there's this linearization one, which obviously changes how like dark or light it is. The bleach one changes kind of how like the colors work, I find. The higher the bleach is on it, the more like kind of cartoony I guess the colors look. But this is a preset that or like effect I guess it's called, that I use quite a bit when I use my when I make my Reshade presets. So this is definitely one that I use. You can also affect the gamma, so how blown out it is or how much shade that you get. Reinhardt is one I use if I'm trying to get a very light look for my Reshade presets. So if I'm not looking for something very you know, that has a lot of contrast, then I'll use Reinhardt. It also helps to kind of mellow out colors. So if I'm finding something too bright, then Reinhardt's something that I use. If you put also shade or effect order matters. So if you turn on an effect and then you literally just drag it up and down, as you can see, it's like changing the way that it interacts with the other shaders or effects. So just be wary of that. If you put something, you know, above or below another effect, it will change the way that it interacts with the other effects. So it's good to turn things on and move them around. I do that a lot to see if I like, you know, a certain lighting more than another, and it just is very helpful in that way. Another thing that I use is FXAA, and this is basically just anti-aliasing. So it'll get rid of the like kind of jagged edges that you get when you turn off edge smoothing, which is what you have to turn off in order for MXAO to show up. So yeah, I usually use like some kind of FXAA, and then I'll type in sharp to instead of like the search bar, and I'll find a sharpening that I like. I do change this out depending on whether it's a gameplay preset or if it's like a build preset, because some of them will look more grainy than others, and So you just have to kind of choose which one you like the most. I think the ones that I use the most is Mode 1 Fine Sharp. I use this one. Adaptive Sharpen I use quite a bit. Luma Sharpen. Fast Sharp I use quite a bit as well. I just like the way this one works well with like other effects shaders. And then Image Sharpening. I think those are the ones that I use the most for sharpening my overall game image. We'll just use the Image Sharpening one for right now. You can put it below or above your anti-aliasing shader. It just depends. You have to kind of look at the edges and see what it does, because sometimes they'll look fuzzy depending on whether it's above or below. So just really play around with it. A lot of Reshade and making a Reshade preset from scratch is playing around with the different effect shaders and moving them around to see what interacts best with other effects. The next thing that I usually do is get a bloom, because I like to have some bloom in my game to just make things look pretty. I also think it offsets the MXAO shadows a lot better, so it doesn't look as intense. So I have a couple of bloom shaders. It's the PPFX bloom, which is a really nice bloom if you want, you know, very bright kind of glowy vibes to your Reshade presets. So this is a good option. I use this one quite a bit. I think the ones I use the most is probably PPFX bloom and this Sforzinda one that I think I got with their Birdie preset. This was like inside of the files with it, and I like this one because it's very soft. It's not as this one has a little bit more contrast, I guess, than this one, but it really just depends on what kind of, you know, vibe that you're going for in your game. You can adjust the bloom curve to make it more shiny, or I guess glowy, and just like mess with the bloom saturation. And there's like different layers, so you know, you got to kind of play around with it. Do you want something that is more, you know, gives more definition like this, or do you want something that's more kind of soft and blown out like this? So it's just really playing around with it. But these are definitely the two blooms that I use. Sometimes I put them together, and these are good for like screenshots mostly, because it's very intense for gameplay or anything like that, but it does make it like very glowy. So if you're going for like a certain vibe, they can be very nice to have. So yeah, you can layer these together, move them around, but I usually do a bloom as well on my presets because I like the way they look. And again, changing the effect order will influence the way it looks, so make sure you play around with that. If it's looking weird in a certain area, move them around and see what you want. You can have something that shows the shadows a bit more. If you put bloom above MXAO, it'll make the MXAO stand out more, whereas if you put it underneath, then it kind of like covers over it. You can kind of see the difference there with the MXAO. So just like move them around and see what you prefer. But I usually will only use one because it tends to make my computer sound like an airplane if I have two on at once. So yeah, that is something that I look out for. Also checking the frames to see how your frames are doing. As you keep adding different effects onto your preset is a good idea, because then you'll know if it's going to make your computer chug or not. But yeah, that's another thing I do. So it's usually bloom. After that, sometimes I'll do a tint. So there's like this tint kind of sepia effect, and it depends on how my, you know, lighting and coloring is going on in the game, because sometimes I want something a bit more warm, so I'll change it to something a bit more warm. Sometimes I tend to go in the kind of like orangey, yellowy kind of side of it, but I don't keep it over here because that's obviously very saturated. I tend to keep it somewhere in like this kind of almost white part over here in the gradient, just to, you know, and then you can like move it around. If you make it very high, it's obviously going to blow out your screen, so maybe don't do that. You can also adjust it from the red, green, and blue kind of toggles over here, so you can adjust how the colors you can adjust how the colors are interacting with each other, whether it's more tinted a certain way. And I do use this sometimes. It depends on, you know, how I'm feeling, whether I want my preset to be a certain color, if I'm liking the way it looks already and I don't want, you know, a different color profile in there, then I won't put it in. But yeah, that's something else that sometimes I do use. And then sometimes I think that it's not like defined enough. So I'll actually do another sharpen. I usually just type it in because it's easier to find it than scrolling through hundreds of effects. And I'll go in, I will sometimes put another sharpening thing on top. It depends on how it is interacting though. But sometimes I just want slightly more definition, so I'll put like another one on top. And then sometimes I'll type in AA, because if I type in AA, it'll show me all the anti-aliasing presets. So this is obviously to get rid of the jagged edges that sometimes comes with putting more sharpening onto your preset. So this will kind of help, you know, mitigate that issue. So I usually will just like, you know, click on a bunch and just see what I like best. Sometimes it's hard to see. You really have to zoom in and you know, look for the jagged edges to see if it's really doing anything. Yeah, because some do more than others, and some are more heavier than others, in the sense that they'll make your frames drop more than others. So that's also something to look out for when you are doing it. But yeah, I just kind of like, you know, I'll change the shade or the effect order and see if it's better in some places than others. I think I like this one actually above MXAO. So I think I'm going to put this one above because I like the way... Yeah, I think I... Actually, maybe not. Maybe I'll have it here. It's something that you really have to like look for too. Like you probably think it's not doing anything right now. You have to like really look for it. On your own screen, obviously it's like easier to see, but yeah. And then from here, sometimes I'll, you know, adjust the ambient occlusion, which is like the MXAO, if I want it really intense or if I don't want it as intense. I'll change that around. I'll change the blending mode around if I want a certain vibe to it, and yeah, just like adjust it as I go along. But those are like usually the things that I choose the most. If I'm finding that things are very blown out, like you can kind of see this is kind of blown out, then I'll go in back to the bloom and I'll turn down the intensity of it, or like the curve of it, because the curve also influences that as well, the saturation and stuff like that, and just see like what is working best with the preset. But yeah, so I'll do that. And sometimes I'll just kind of adjust if it's looking a little bit too yellow. Sometimes I'll adjust the tint, or I'll also go back into Filmic Pass and I'll change this a little bit more. They also have gamma for different colors, so you can kind of like change that as well. So I changed that up a bit just to make it maybe not as yellow or green or blue or whatever. Another thing that I use, I'll type in color, and Prod 80 has a lot of different color effects that are very useful. I like to use the selective color ones because if you click on the selective color ones, it'll actually come up with like different colors, so reds, yellows, greens, cyans, and this will help you to choose specific colors to adjust. So like if I choose cyan, obviously like the sky is going to be different. You can choose how saturated that's going to be. It affects obviously all the cyans in the game, so it's not like just the sky. Like as you can see down here, like the flowers are also changing when I move this around. But this is also something that's very handy if I want to adjust certain colors. If something's looking a little bit too intense, I find that the ones I adjust the most are greens and yellows, because I find that those are the most I don't know, I find that I have to adjust these the most out of all the colors in the game. So yeah, if that's something that you want to adjust, you want it to be less saturated or more saturated, then this is a very handy effect to use. I like to use this to kind of balance out my colors, especially if I decide to make things more colorful. There's like this colorfulness thing, because sometimes I think it's looking a little bleak and then I'll want to add some more color back into it. But this is obviously very saturated, so you can also like obviously adjust it with how saturated it is. But if I want like a specific saturation, but I don't like, you know, a certain color being as saturated than the others, then I can go into that Prod 80 effect, and I can just like adjust how, you know, red something is or how yellow something is. So that's also very handy and something that I use quite often when I am making a new preset. So that's also something, if you guys want to make your own presets, then that's also something to look out for. But yeah, that's kind of like the process, I guess, that I use for making a preset. It's very much like, you know, just testing it out as you go and clicking things on and off and moving things around. But this is like the general order that I usually have things in. Sometimes I'll move my bloom preset, or sorry, effect, depending on how glowy I want it to be. If it's at the bottom, it kind of is like the most glowy I find that it can be, like it glows the most. So sometimes I'll have it on the bottom if I want it to be very glowy, and other times I'll move it around if I don't want it to be as glowy. But yeah, I really just move things around. It's really just, you know, adjusting things as you go along. It's very individual too, like, and also something to know, if you don't like, you know, a certain color in the game, lighting plays a really big role in interiors. You often see me when I'm doing builds that I'll adjust the lighting color, but I find like the EA one can be very yellow. I like to make it this like kind of, I don't know, it's almost kind of pinky. I don't know. I try to be like kind of neutral with it, but like I do kind of put it more into this kind of warmer area. But that will also influence, obviously, and interact with your Reshade preset. So indoor lighting matters when you are making a preset. It's also a good idea to have, if it is like a gameplay preset specifically that you're going for, it's a good idea to go in game and actually like have a sim on the lot, because then you'll be able to see how not only it interacts with the actual world and the objects and everything, and how it's going to look for like outdoors, and like with the build, but you're also going to be able to see how it interacts with the sim, because you'll have to, like I said before, because they're low poly meshes, you'll be able to see whether MXO is like weird with it, or if the skin tone is looking weird with it. Like obviously like the bloom in this one doesn't mesh well with them, so then you'll be able to adjust it, you know, how you want it to be, and whether it's going to be like very saturated or more blown out, or, you know, whatever you want, right? It's a good idea to have a sim on the lot if you're doing a gameplay preset. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do. I can't really think of anything else. Sometimes I'll put on this Prod 80 contrast, brightness, and saturation, because I adjust obviously all of those things, and so it's very handy in that way. You can change the tint, which is also very handy if you're looking for a certain tint. The exposure can also be changed if you want more, you know, something brighter or not as bright, especially if it's messing with your game's UI, which is why I actually use the chalk UI, because I like to have bloom and that kind of glowy effect with my Reshade presets. I do tend to use different UIs because the white UI tends to get very blown out. So it's just like more handy to have different UI presets or like things. And this one is by Vexated. It's the chalked UI that I use. This is like the dark one. And the other one that I also use, which looks more in kind of retro, typical like Sims blue UI, is also by Vexated. So if you're looking for a different UI that isn't as bright white as the usual like default one is, then you can definitely look into that. But yeah, I use them all the time for my game, and it is very useful for you know, not blinding you when you're trying to build and play the game, because the white UI is nice, but it can be kind of intense. So yeah, this like contrast brightness and saturation effect by Prod 80 is also very, very useful. You can move it, as I said before, a million times with the different effects to see where you like it the most. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for how I build a preset. It's pretty much all of those things. I guess you can kind of see on the side, it's like MXAO, Filmic Pass, sometimes Rain Hard. It depends on, you know, the vibe that I'm going for. Anti-aliasing, filtering, sharpening, contrast and brightness, more anti-aliasing. Sometimes a sepia I'll put on it, then selective color if I want to adjust colors in a specific way. If I feel like it's been too desaturated, then I'll get colorfulness. And then there's always some kind of bloom that I put on top, whether that's by PP effects here with like the very bloom, very like, kind of cinematic looking bloom, or if it's this one by Sforzinda that's a little bit more chill and a little bit less bright. But yeah, that's pretty much how I make my Reshade presets. So if you were looking for a process, that's how it usually goes. But as I said before, the one that I have been using in my videos will be linked in the description. And if you need any help, definitely look into those links that I'm going to leave at Picture Amoebas, Tumblr. They've been so helpful in the community for Reshade, troubleshooting and help. So they're a really valuable resource. And all of the other things that I've talked about in this video for like the backgrounds and the different, you know, replacements, those will also be linked in the description. I made a little like Google document with like direct links, so it'll be super easy. All of them are listed there. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. I hope that this covers a lot of the things that people have been asking about, and you find it helpful in some way. But I will see you guys next time in the next video.